Welcome to this video lecture on technology and innovation management. This video lecture is brief. It is only a recap of a live session held at the University of Hamburg on the 28th of November 2023 with the topic digital transformation. In this brief video lecture, I will recap parts of that session and I want to alert students to course evaluations. First, I would like to ask you to fill out the feedback forms for this course. You can see the links here and you can scan the QR code with your handheld device. Alternatively, you can just go to the online webpage and enter the password. In all of these cases, please do so and give us feedback on this course. Tell us what went well and what we should improve for next time in the rest of the semester, of course. There are two parts. One of them are scale-based questions on how satisfied you were with different components of the course. And the second part are free text fields where you can give suggestions and written feedback. The second part is particularly useful to us. Thank you very much for doing so. Now, in this brief video lecture, I want to recap one aspect of the session on digital transformation that we covered in class in November in Hamburg, namely the changes to institutional logics because of digitalization. Part 1 and 2 were covered online. Part 4 is also online, but in part 3, which we did in class, we did recap part 1 and 2 already. So if you're confused by now, the rest of this brief video lecture is only about part 4, changes to institutional logics because of digitalization. On OpenOLAT, in your lecture notes, you will see the video lectures I created on this topic. I will only briefly summarize what is in these lectures. The key point here is this notion about institutional change that is being brought forward by digitalization and digital transformation. For that to understand, we need to know this notion of an institution. What it means is that an organization is not just a rational system, a fabric or a firm for producing goods and service, and that is adapting to market forces, but also at the same time social and cultural systems that are embedded within a context of expectations, prescriptions, and approval about what is constituting appropriate or what is called legitimate behavior. So firms, as well as other types of organizations, are also social, cultural, as well as rational systems that are embedded in a wider context of expectations and particular normative behavior, and they have that themselves. Yeah, so an organization could prescribe, for example, that it is okay or not okay to work from home. That would be either legitimate or illegitimate, irrespective of what other organizations would do, what your own preferences might be, or even what the legal context would stipulate. This is what this is. So an organization is always an institution. This is important in the context of digital transformation because digital transformation as the adoption and implementation of digital innovation is then a question of how is the new way of working brought forward by these technology legitimate, or how is it becoming legitimate? Yeah, so why is a possibility that is enabled through technological change then becoming an institutionalized and legitimate or otherwise deemed appropriate behavior? Now, for that to understand, we need to know how this legitimization, making some behavior part of the norm or the way we do things around here, how that usually happens. There's typically three ways. One of them is that one organization simply copies another organization. That's a process called mimetic isomorphism. So it adopts a way of working that it sees being successful at some other firm. Yeah, so for example, a company that might institute flexible work arrangements and seem to be doing okay, might trigger other organizations to do the same thing. Another way to make certain behavior legitimate is through coercion. In particular through regulation and legislation that just prescribes what the appropriate thing to do is. So, for example, during the pandemic, we had legislation that forced organizations to accept their people to stay at home and work from home, even though they may or may not have deemed this legitimate or appropriate themselves. The law demanded it at that stage. And the third one is a process that's called law normative legitimacy. This type of behavior is just becoming the standard in this particular profession. This is just the way we do things here. Now, all of this is important because what digital transformation inevitably always does is that it propels possible new institutional arrangements. So it creates possibilities to enact new behavior that then may or may not become legitimate. But because it's new, it's always in clash or in a tension with existing behavior. And we can distinguish three forms. One of them would be ways of organizing. How do we organize ourselves at work? The second part would be infrastructures, or third would be building blocks of organizations. All of these three things through digital technologies could be transformed. And whether or not they're better or not is out of the question. But the key point is that when they are being transformed, they will always have tangents between the new and the old, between the existing and the possibility. And then the question is, which of these alternative forms becomes legitimate? And how do we achieve this legitimization? Now, that means whether or not the possibilities engendered through digital transformation become appropriate is not actually a technological question. It's not as simple a question as this is the better way, the cheaper way, the faster way, the more efficient way, but it's a question of whether or not that is institutionally accepted as an appropriate and legitimate behavior. Yeah. So this is because not only organization, but also technologies are social cultural systems. Yeah. So, for example, in Germany here, we have a particularly old, very historically evolved country where what is considered appropriate, what is okay as behavior, has many, many deep, very ancient historical, cultural, Christian, and other types of roots. Yeah, helping thy neighbor is a good example. That's a very German thing to do. To help your neighbor is in other countries, you wouldn't do that. You would basically barely know your neighbors. Yeah? So here it's appropriate and in some way expected that neighbors help each other out. In other countries, this is far from the truth. Yeah. Another example would be that paying cash with coins and notes as opposed to digital payments or sort of cashless payments was a completely appropriate, legitimate, and normal way of doing things, irrespective of technological solutions that would have made it possible otherwise. So this process of legitimization, as I said, is usually achieved through mimetic pressure, legislation, or standardization, through laws, something becoming the norm, the standard, or because the mimetic pressure, the pressure to copy other organizations that are successful with it, becomes too high. A good example of this tension between a technological possibility, institutional legitimization, is when you think about how Uber got adopted or not in different countries. Now, in America, Uber has very quickly been established as a ride-hailing service, right? As a shared mobility service, to the point that it's completely and utterly, entirely legitimate to call an Uber as opposed to a taxi. Now, not as only as an individual, but also if you're a worker, if you're a professional working for a firm, for example. It became legitimate to the point that in many airports, have dedicated Uber lanes, like literally roads for Uber cars to drive and park, because it's considered this, right? In addition to taxi lanes. Now, contrast this to Germany. In Germany, Uber got introduced. It's the same technological environment, the same possibility. The app is the same, but Uber cars are not legitimate. For one thing, they are legal. Yeah, there are certain laws in these countries that actually, at least make it very difficult, and if not illegal, to operate as an Uber driver. Right. So we also don't have Uber lines in our cities and our hotels or airports. And also, if you were to take an Uber, for example, if I take an Uber here, the university would refuse to reimburse me for this expense. If I take a taxi, no problem. Yeah. So legitimization, even of the same technology, depending on the context, can look very different depending on laws, mimetic pressures, what is considered acceptable or standard. in a profession. Yeah, work from home. I mentioned this example as well. This is a institutionalization, legitimization question that we see now. We've had it during the pandemic temporarily that it was mandated by law. Well, now it's not anymore. And what we see at the moment is really this tension between there's an infrastructure available that makes working from home possible in many, many, many jobs. At the same time, many organizations now don't find it appropriate anymore, and they want their employees to come back into the office. One part of the reasons are cost savings because they do have these big assets, the buildings. So they want them to be utilized by staff. And we see really this tension playing out between the technological possibility that comes with all sorts of time savings, cost savings, convenience gains for many people, the flexibility that would allow them to work from home. On the other hand, we see this pressure by the organization for them to come home. Which of these two sides wins is not particularly clear at the moment. For many organizations at the moment, the working from home, the technological possibility wins over the question of what is considered appropriate or even mandated by, let's say, policy in an organization. Yeah. So in other words, in most organizations, whether or not there's a work in the office policy or not, people pretty much get away from working from home. That may not be the case everywhere. This third example that I brought here is a country level example, that of Estonia. Now, in Estonia, it is possible to become a citizen digitally without ever setting foot in Estonia. So you can become a digital citizen of Estonia, which would allow you, for example, to register a startup business very quickly. Like, this entire process only takes you several minutes of work. So they actually developed a lot of technological possibilities and building blocks, like a digital citizen identity card here, and certain laws that will allow you to actually open a business account and register a firm without being physically present. So they have some of these building blocks in place that allow people to do that irrespective of where they actually reside. That is unthinkable in Germany. Yeah, you can't open a business account without being physically present, or you can't register a firm without going to a lawyer or a notary. And you have to reside and live in Germany, otherwise you don't get a citizenship, and you certainly don't have a digital identity card either. So here, some of the building blocks are not there. And another example that I have here concerns, if you know something about Apple devices or other types of devices, there's a new law that has been passed that demands of all electronic devices to follow the USB-C standard. That's the plug on the right here, as an interface format for all devices. So here's an example for courses legislation that says the only appropriate legitimate thing to do for your device is to use the USB-C standard. You have to. Yeah. So here we have a legal ruling that sets the standard for what is considered appropriate, and everything that is not, like old iPhones, for example, are no longer appropriate because they don't follow this particular standard. This is the end of my little recap. Please keep in mind that you should also watch the original video lectures from that last session if you haven't done so already. Thank you very much for watching and listening.